A wounded woman in the forest tries to wash off her wound when she suddenly hears a voice nearby. She gets inside a cave and hunts an animal. She exhibits more animal-like behaviors than human ones. She runs through the forest looking for things to hunt and sleeps in the forest. Peggy sits near the swimming pool reading a book when a guy approaches her, asking her to get in the pool with him. She completely disregards his request, leaving him angry, and turns around to check if her father is watching. Chris is standing on the balcony looking down. Chris is a successful country lawyer who is known and respected by all family and friends. His wife, Belle, brings him a beer, and he thanks her. She tells him that Dina wants to talk to him, but Chris cuts her off by saying that if Dina wants to talk to him, she should do it herself, not tell Belle behind his back, and shut her off. He then asks his wife if she can bring him food. Dina is an old woman whose husband is terminally sick. She tells Chris that she wants to sell everything she has and spend whatever time he has left with him for at least a couple of months. Chris comforts her, saying he will help her set up the paperwork and promises he will get her a good price for her property. Brian, Chris's son, watches as a little girl gets bullied, but he doesn't react or try to stop them at all. Instead, he continues playing as if nothing is happening. Brian gets to the car and discusses his hoop skills with his dad. He also tells him about the guy who has a thing for Peggy. Belle rolls Chris's cigarettes for him, and he asks her if she has fed the dogs as she goes out for hunting. Chris scouts the forest looking for something to hunt and waits till something shows up. Eventually, he sees a feral woman taking a bath in the river close by. He hides and continues watching her movements. Chris then returns to his home and calls his family. He tells them to follow him to the basement and assigns them chores to move all the stuff from the basement. When Belle asks him why they are doing this, he tells her to trust him and just do what he says. Peggy and Belle watch him as he works all night outside. Chris finally returns to the forest to look for the woman he saw. He watches as she slowly gets out of the cave, traps her using a net, and knocks her out.
I don't want to hurt you!
Peggy is at school in her geometry class, and she suddenly asks to head out to the ladies' room and rushes out. The teacher notices her unusual behavior and asks her if she is okay. Brian is also at school competing with a girl who can shoot hoops without missing. He later gets to class and puts gum on the girl's hairbrush because he is still upset she beat him. The girl's hair gets ripped off because of the gum, and Brian pretends to help. Chris hangs the woman and handcuffs both her hands and legs. He examines her body and notices her odd odor. And when he checks for her teeth, she wakes up and bites his ring finger off along with his ring. She spits out his ring while looking at him directly and swallows his finger. He slaps her continuously, but she looks at him smiling without fear. He goes to his house and washes his hands with a band-aid on his finger. Chris then returns and tries to talk to her. He tries to make her understand that he is in charge. She tries to bite him, but he pulls away and ties her closer to the wall. He then shoots at her to discipline her. Chris tells her that he will now bring his wife and kids and tell her to behave. He asks everyone to follow him to the basement. When they get to her, they all stare at the woman in shock and ask him what is going on. Chris tells them that the woman has gone through a lot and that they will help her. Chris tells them they are all gonna have to share the responsibilities of taking care of her, but he warns them that touching is strictly forbidden because the woman has bitten him before. Belle gets scared when she finds out she did that. Chris tells them they are going to train her and civilize her because the woman thinks she is an animal. Chris asks Belle if she can bring some food because she hasn't eaten anything, at least since chopping off his finger. Chris warns everyone to keep their distance and push the food towards her. The woman angrily spills the food. Chris pushes the food towards her and tells them she will eat once she gets hungry enough. Chris tells the family that this is going to be their secret project, so they can't say anything to anyone. They are all going to share the chores of taking care of her, the same as they do with the dogs. At night, the little girl goes near the basement and plays the woman's music so she can feel better. Mice come to the basement and eat the spilled food. Chris comes to Peggy's room to check on her and talks to her about school and her teenage years. Belle stands at the door, staring at them as they talk. When Chris comes to the bedroom, Belle asks him if they should be doing this to the woman. He instantly slaps her and goes to bed as if nothing happened, leaving her in shock.
Let's go to bed, babe.
During the day, Chris is just another lawyer who helps people and is friendly with people. Peggy is isolated at school and doesn't engage in any activities in school. Her geometry teacher is concerned about Peggy's sudden behavioral change and wearing loose-fitting clothes. Peggy lies down and cries as she watches her classmates. Belle is at the supermarket when she runs into a neighbor, and her neighbor asks her if they can have a barbecue at their house. But Belle tells the woman that the house is a bit messy these days, while in reality, she knows what they are hiding in their basement. The woman grows hungrier, so she has no choice but to eat the spilled food in front of her. Chris is at his office as usual. He flirts with his assistant and gives her compliments. Belle is in the kitchen baking some cookies with their youngest daughter, Darlin. Darlin asks her mother why the woman is here, and Belle tells her her father is helping her. Belle catches Brian hovering in the basement and calls him out. She warns him that she will tell his father.
Just wanted to see if she was okay.
That what you want me to tell your father?
Chris gets home from work and tells Brian to take care of the dogs, as it is his turn. Brian screams at the dogs and feeds them. Peggy's teacher tries to talk to her about her recent behavior. Her teacher noticed nausea and the baggy clothes she has been wearing, and she also heard from her gym teacher that she has been sitting at the gym for weeks. Peggy gets defensive and tells the teacher to mind her own business. Brian digs a hole in the basement door and places gum on it to hide it. Belle boils water and presents it to Chris. They bring some washcloths to scrub her with. Chris asks Brian to clean up her waist since she hasn't been potty trained yet. Chris puts on a glove, sprays hot water on Sar and starts scrubbing her.
We both know the only way to get something clean is with good hot water.
The woman stares at Belle as if calling for help. Belle nervously picks up wood and walks towards Chris as he scrubs off the woman. The woman stares at her with an anticipation that she might do something, but Belle instead points out that the thing the woman has been tied to has loosened and hands Chris the wood. Chris tells her that they will have to take the woman outside and clean her using a hose. Belle leaves without trying to help the woman. She then sews a dress for her to cover up with. Chris and Brian are outside preparing the tools they're going to use to wash the woman with. Chris then tells Brian to get inside and get his mom and Peggy. Brian throws a cigarette at the woman and insults her. The woman stares at Peggy's stomach and whispers, "Baby," leaving Peggy in shock. Chris then sprays water on the woman while she screams in agony, making everyone uncomfortable as Peggy begs him to stop. Peggy couldn't stand it anymore, so she ran out and turned off the machine. Chris insists that she isn't clean enough. The woman slurs the word please, and Chris is happy that she is learning manners. Chris asks Belle to dry her off while he holds a gun to the woman's face as she stands there naked. Chris treats the woman's hand that's scarred from the handcuffs. Belle shows Chris the dress she has made for herself, and he instructs her to put it on.
This is just all new to her, that's all. She's a little scared.
Chris brings the woman food and drink, which she devours quickly as Chris teaches her how to say thank you. Peggy's geometry teacher expresses her concern to her friend about Peggy's pregnancy. She stares at a paper with Peggy's parents' address and phone number. Her friend advises her not to get involved. The teacher calls the house phone while the whole family is having dinner, and Chris asks Peggy to pick up the phone. The teacher leaves a voicemail, but Peggy quickly deletes it and returns to the table.
This message is for Mr. or Mrs. Cleek. Your daughter Peggy is...
During the night, Chris wakes up and leaves the bed when he makes sure that Belle is asleep. Little did he know that Belle had not slept. Chris then walks downstairs slowly and gets outside, heading to the basement. Wakened by Chris's footsteps, Brian follows his father to the basement without Chris seeing him from behind. Chris lights a candle and starts taking the woman's clothes off. Brian sees what's happening from the basement door's hole. Chris takes off his pants and inappropriately performs coitus with the woman. Brian runs to the house after he has seen everything. Belle knows what he is doing in the basement, but she can't do anything about it, so she cries in her bed. Chris gets the woman dressed, returns to his bed, and hugs Belle from behind like nothing happened. The next morning, Belle tells Peggy it's time for school. Peggy tells her mom that she doesn't feel good today and asks if she can stay at home. Belle gives up and lets her stay in bed. Chris asks Brian what he will do today, since he only has half a day in school, and tells him to be more like him. Peggy's teacher notices that she is missing class today. Brian goes straight to his house after school. He is left alone at home with Peggy, and she is just reading her books. He takes the pliers from the toolbox and heads to the basement. He gets inside, but when he tries to be close to the woman, she scarily roars at him. Brian gets a little scared, but then disregards the woman. He breaks a cookie in half and tries to feed her, but she is unwilling to eat. Brian then pulls out the pliers as the woman starts roaring. After a while, Peggy hears several shouts and heads to the basement. Brian is torturing the woman. Peggy runs to the basement with all the power she has and catches Brian in the act. The woman is undressed, and blood is pouring from her chest. Peggy quickly gets dressed and apologizes for everything that is happening to her. Peggy tells her mom about the incident with the woman, and Belle waits for Chris to get home and scold him. Belle tells Chris what happened today just as he gets home from work. She tells him that Brian violated the woman and tortured her, knowing no one was at home, and Peggy caught him pleasuring himself to her pain. Chris disregards Belle's anger and asks Brian if he has done what Belle is claiming he did. Belle gets furious because of the disregard, but Chris tells her to calm down. Brian remains quiet when Chris asks him if it is true. Chris asks Belle if anyone is hurt. She's surprised by his lack of concern. Chris justified Brian's action, saying he's a boy and an adolescent. He said boys would be boys and take Brian's sick act for curiosity because of his age. Belle crashes out with his response. Belle questions his morality because he is a lawyer, and she is a human being, and yet he is justifying this act. She asks him what he thinks would happen if the police found out about what they do to the dogs, let alone this. All of his acts could easily get him thrown in jail at this instant.
Do you know what would happen to all of us if you got caught?
Chris tells her she has something to be ashamed of, too. Belle tells him she never condoned what he did. Belle tells him he can't get away with doing things like this anymore. Chris tells her what she's going to do about it in a condescending tone and laughs at her. Belle tells him she is leaving him and taking the girls with her, but he can keep Brian, who is already like him. She tells him that he and Brian can do whatever they like, but they can't hurt her girls anymore. Chris starts throwing punches and beating her until she gets on the floor.
I can't!
Chris asks Peggy to bring a cold cloth for her mother. Suddenly, there is a knock on the door, and Peggy opens it. Peggy's teacher is at the door and insists on getting inside the house and speaking to her parents. Chris tells Peggy to let her in and invites her to sit. When the teacher looks at Belle from the kitchen table, Chris tells her that she is taking a power nap. The teacher asks to speak privately to both of Peggy's parents, but Chris dismisses her and invites Brian in, saying, "There are no secrets in this family." The teacher continues to tell Chris she has observed distressing behavior from Peggy. She asks Chris if Peggy has a boyfriend. Chris tells her that's impossible, and the teacher continues saying Peggy might be pregnant. Chris asks what made her come to that conclusion. The teacher tells him she picked it out from her behavioral and body changes that she can see. Chris gets defensive about the whole situation and asks if he is accusing him or his son of incest, since Peggy doesn't have a boyfriend. The teacher hurries to leave when she sees Chris turning angrier, but Chris slams the door and tells Brian to get a rope. They start dragging the teacher onto the field as Peggy cries and begs him to let her go.
Daddy, please stop! Daddy, please, she's my teacher!
When Peggy tells him he can't do this, he pushes her and starts rumbling about the woman in the family, who tells him he can't like her mother and her sisters. The teacher begs Chris and promises not to tell anyone. Chris goes to Peggy and abuses her while he screams at her. The teacher tells him to stop, but Brian warns her to shut her mouth while beating her. Chris tells Peggy he has an internal hate for all women and continues saying insulting things. He then confirms he had an intimate relationship with her and that she is not even good at it. They take the teacher to the doghouse, and the dogs start leaping in excitement because they are hungry. Brian and Chris leave her inside the dog's house and watch the teacher scream in agony. The teacher gets further from the dogs and leans back. Chris tells her that it's a bad idea and mentions the word anophthalmia when suddenly another girl with no eyes comes and attacks her by biting her flesh off. Brian gets excited seeing his other sister attack the woman, and Chris repeats the words so she can attack her woman. Peggy runs to the house to get the keys. She finally gets to the basement and starts uncuffing the woman. The third sister from the doghouse starts acting like a dog and eats off the teacher's flesh. Belle sees Peggy uncuffing the woman and asks her what she has done in fear. The woman attacks Belle and eats her alive as a kind of revenge for not helping her. The woman then goes to the doghouse and kills Brian by beating him with a wooden stick. Chris tries to shoot her, but she catches up to him, stabbing him several times with a wooden stake. Peggy tries to escape with her sister, but the woman catches her. She tells her she let her go because she has a baby. She then makes the third sister her pet by disciplining and feeding it. She then takes Darlin because she is kind to her and she is innocent. The little girl offers her water as a truce, and the woman accepts and takes her with her as they form a new family of their own.